the Bible is a book full of accurate history and it talks about subjects like life and death, it's applicable. What kind of a radical thought to some people, but hopefully we'll see in the book of Joshua that it very much covers the themes that everyone deals with in their lives on a day-to-day basis or on the ultimate basis. My name is Eric Slaywick, aka the UWM Pen Guy. To all my UWM friends, let's get into the Word. And as always, if you like what you're seeing, then I would ask for the small favor that you hit like and subscribe to help the channel grow. So, without further ado, let's get into the Word. Today we are going to officially begin our study of Joshua, the book of Joshua, with Joshua chapter 1. And as will often be the case, the very first introduction to a book will entail a little more detail, perhaps. But if you're looking for more in-depth background and detail concerning the book of Joshua, you can check out the Joshua Themes commentaries that I have up on the channel. So, Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Now, obviously, this is part of a statement, and it is equally apparent that the verse divisions in the scriptures are not inspired. They're not part of the original text. The original text was a large block of letters. The Hebrew didn't even have vowels, and the Greek didn't have punctuation, nor did the Hebrew. But in any case, it is a convenient way to divide up a study of the text because they are the same verses in literally every translation that has been made of the Bible everywhere on earth, and they have even been put back into the original languages. They're so universal. So I will go by these because they are just a helpful way to study the Word. So the first thing we can see here, and it's a theme that especially in the book of Joshua will come up again and again and again and again, and that's the theme of historicity, or the historical quality and the implied historical reliability of the scriptures. Now, here it's a very minor example in dealing with the fact that we have historical characters, Joshua, Moses, and these are men whose stories are recorded in books of history in the scriptures. So this isn't myth or legend, fairy tale, or compilation. This is certainly presented as a sober-minded chronicle. It would be in the same category as the Chronicles of Kings or the histories of Thucydides and Herodotus, although it can be demonstrated that there is less of a penchant, perhaps, for dramatizing in the scriptures than there is in those other sources. We'll come back to this theme on a number of occasions, so we'll let it rest for now. Nevertheless, it is the first line of the history. And it is true that as far as I know, the majority of the historical books, Old and New Testament, they begin this way. Luke begins with a massive 5-verse prologue that puts him in the context of Thucydides and Herodotus, the classical historians, and He begins Acts, inasmuch as I compiled a record of the things said and done among us in the former treatise, O Theophilus, so that it's showing that this is an attempt at history and not just memory by itself or tall tales or anything like that. Because with the very first line, as here in Joshua, we have the presentation of history. Now, I hope to make another video on the channel comparing this with the other scriptures of the world to demonstrate that the Bible is utterly unique in this regard. But for now, let's move on to the fact that we have here and in the first several verses of Joshua a direct connection between Moses and Joshua, and it's presented in a way that is harmonious and symmetrical. And essentially, Joshua is a very smoothly developed sequel to the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And there's no doubt that... Now, it may seem easy in the mindset of higher criticism, naturalistic atheism, and the like, to line these things up if there's some sort of committee or something that's putting it together, but it's actually much more difficult than it might seem. It's hard enough in the modern world. Think about in entertainment media, storytelling, how often you see contradictions within an author's own work, within anyone who's trying to follow up on that work. You just see how difficult it is, even in modern times, let alone in the ancient world, when they had just a fraction of the resources we have today. So don't underestimate the significance of the unity of the scriptures. And in terms of applying it as a Christian believer, for those who are Christian believers, don't undervalue that interconnectedness. So, to move on to, I guess you could say, the more daily living application side of things now, we have the fact that at the end of Deuteronomy, you had the death of Moses. And at that time, Israel lamented deeply for Moses in Deuteronomy 34. And to this very group of people, it may have seemed as if though things were now hopeless. Moses was the only leader they'd ever known, and he had led the nation well, not perfectly. The reason why Joshua is here now and Moses isn't is, as God had told him back in Numbers, that because of the fact that he got frustrated and allowed his human anger to overwhelm him, he misrepresented God before the people, and he would not be allowed to see the promised land as a result of that. So that we see that, as James says, that the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. But it wasn't the end. Moses got a very good send-off, but Joshua had been being prepared for perhaps 2 decades or more. He was one of the original 12 spies that had entered the land, and he, along with Caleb, were the only 2 who gave a report of faith, a faithful report of faith. and to reference our common Hebrews 11:1 derived set of categories. If you're wondering about that, you can look at the video I believe is entitled "What is Faith?" And Joshua, he pled the power of God in his court case, that these giants, that God would be with us. These giants can be defeated. We see this in, I believe, Numbers 14. And so he survived. The rest of the rebels were destroyed. And the rest of the people wandered around aimlessly for 4 decades. But now we're here. And that whole time was over, and now it was time for a new beginning. There is always time for a new beginning as long as there is life and breath in a person. That is one of the most important lessons you can learn from the scriptures, is that it's never too late for God. Now, there were consequences, and there will be consequences even for the sin we see in this generation, but here we are at the new beginning. In fact, it is merely the beginning in reality of Joshua's life and ministry here. He had a lot of faithful service and preparation. There is in, I believe, Numbers again, an example of Joshua warring with one of Israel's main enemies. And he's doing, in a sense, the really hard work while Moses is simply holding up his hands. And it would determine whether the Israelites won or lost. But Joshua was doing the actual fighting so that he was getting ready for his leadership role to come. So the final subject for today will then be the idea of God speaking to Joshua. This is an interesting example of a theme we can carry on throughout the Word of God, which is the idea of the roles that God assigns. Now, only the Messiah, Jesus, will have all 3 roles: prophet, priest, and king. But others may have 1 or 2 of these roles. Or in the case of Joshua, 1 in full, 1 in part, and 1 not at all. But any time someone attempted to usurp all 3, God was not pleased, because only the Messiah can be all 3. Any sinner attempting to usurp that position is literally acting as an antichrist, a false Messiah, attempting to take on the full role of Jesus Christ. And God does not take that sort of blasphemy lightly. There is a king, Uzziah, in the days of Isaiah, who found this out the hard way because he decided that being king wasn't good enough for him, that he would also invade the priesthood and take over that as well. God had not given that to him. He had given that to the sons of Aaron. And as a result, Uzziah was struck with leprosy and had to live separately from the people for the rest of his life. And his son had a regency, essentially, a co-rulership where he was effectively the ruler and dad was technically the ruler, but pretty useless with his leprosy in his little house off in the middle of nowhere. So it's serious. Joshua is, now we can look at these 3 roles of Christ. Christ was a prophet because God had said to Moses that there would arise a prophet like Moses. And That idea was floating around in the Gospels and very much in the time of the Gospels and very much fulfilled in the Messiah. We can see that Christ is the great high priest in Hebrews here, where it says we do not have a high priest that is unable to sympathize with us in our weaknesses, but was tempted in every way like we were, and yet without sin. He was the high priest. He became a man, and therefore he is able to represent us. He also has the office of priest. And of course, he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who will someday sit on the throne of David as the great and final king of Israel and the world. And right now, he is the King and Lord of all those who have turned to him by grace alone, through faith alone, with no means mediating that grace in his finished faith, through grace through faith in his finished sacrifice. So if you haven't yet accepted that, I would encourage you to do so. And until then, this is Eric Slawick, the UWM pen guy for all my UWM friends. And until the next time.